I don't think I need it. It's okay. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. I've got a teacher's voice, so I think we'll be fine. He's talking today on work that they've been doing to create a multilingual dictionary, and the problem they have of inclusivity and exclusivity. Just before we start, I think there's a task here. Has anyone actually scanned this with their phone yet? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Has anybody actually scanned this with their phone yet? If you can, do try and do that if your phone has the capability. But I think because we're a little bit late, and without further ado, I'll hand over to Martin. Thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you. And let's make sure I didn't. Okay, this works. And let's watch the computer play a little game. Okay, so I'll be talking to you today about something we're doing at the Kamusi Project. Now, I will watch as we go through this schizophrenic connection. Okay, so Kamusi is the Swahili word for dictionary, and what we're talking about right now is language data. Started as a project for Swahili and is now expanding to be towards the goal of building a complete matrix of human expression across time and space. So we're doing this as a knowledge resource, the sort of thing that you can go and look upwards in your language, learn about language, and also as a data resource for machines to be able to use your data, use language data for all the sorts of things that language technology can be done for machine translation, for speech to text, for any of that sort of thing that you need the data to begin with. In order to do that, we need to, our long-term goal is to collect every word in every language, and then to share all those words. We've been started about 21 years ago in the US. Kamusi is now a registered nonprofit in the US and in Switzerland, and based at EPFL in Switzerland. Also part of something called the White House Big Data Initiative, which is a network dealing with big data issues from the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the United States, in the White House in the US, but it doesn't actually come with funding or, but hopefully that'll change in the future. Nobody scanned the barcode that I had at the beginning, but I want to open by, had you scanned the barcode, you would have found these, this result. You would have, the barcode, the QR code is on the tin of sweetened condensed milk there, which is sold in Sri Lanka. And if you, so this is a Nestle's product, Nestle is a huge international corporation. If you scan that barcode, you'll come up with the first little image there. There's this little image, which gives you, it says, welcome to Milkmaid, and then you can click on other screens and you can find nutritional facts, and you can find recipes, and you can find, there are several recipes, there's more, there's information about the environment, all this great stuff that you can find out about this Milkmaid sweetened condensed milk. What's wrong with this picture? Well, that you can't read it. If you had it on your phone, you could read it. To me, what's wrong with this picture is this is being sold in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has 91%, or some of our Sri Lankan friends will argue, 97% literacy. About 20 million people, these are round numbers, but only 10% of them speak some English. So the literacy in Sri Lanka is 90% of the 16 million people who speak Sinhala and 90% of the 4 million people who speak Tamil. So these people are not, if they're going to scan their QR code, they're not getting their information about their product in Sinhala and Tamil, they're getting it in English, and then it's a language they don't read. So they don't have nutritional information. They can't read the ingredients on the back of the can, because the ingredients on the back of the can are also in English. So Nestle's is taking the easiest route, which is, let's just put it in English and it's out there, and they're missing, you know, a very large proportion of their market. And really, how difficult is it to put this information in Sinhala? With the help of some of the people here, we did that. But we can do it in a much more systematic way. You can do it in Sinhala, and you can do it in Russian, if you can see that slide. You can do it in Swahili. You can do it for sweetened condensed milk. You can do it for any other canned product, any other food product. There is a small, you know, a finite number of ingredients that could be done. You can do it for the clothing tags on your that are sewn into clothes. You can do it for instructions, whether for people to use products that are built or for people to work in factories or any other things that need instructions. You can do it for medicines, for the instructions on a pill bottle. How many people around the world have never been able, if they were to receive a medicine from a prescription, would never have, no, don't take with alcohol. Take this with food. Take 3 times a day. Side effects include in the list of side effects. These are all things that for probably the vast majority of the world's population, they never get to see in their own language. So this is a question beyond what has been talked about education, you know, reaching school children. This is for, you know, all of the adults today who are never going to sit back and, you know, go and learn English. All of the school children who are never actually going to learn English. They still need to be able to access throughout the rest of their lives all of this sort of information in their own language, or they don't have that access to that information. Another example where lots of languages come in contact with each other. This is a map of, so that's Catania in Sicily, in Italy, and there's, many of you have heard of the refugee crisis of people flooding out of various African countries and trying to cross the Mediterranean and get their way into Europe. And the amount of language contact, they land at Catania, they have local people who are in the soup kitchens who are speaking Sicilian. They have doctors in the hospitals who are speaking Italian. People on the rescue crafts are speaking, and in the aircrafts are speaking Spanish, and the sea patrols are speaking Icelandic. You never know what sort of language is going to come into contact, what sort of language needs you have, but they're certainly not necessarily going to be in English around the world. And even if the need is to go in to use English, we have to figure out how to organize the data so that you can have these sorts of interactions between languages and resources for each specific language. So I want to talk a little bit first about how dictionaries have been organized traditionally and why it is that you are unable to have really good translation resources from one language to another using a multilingual dictionary, and then what we're going to do, how we've organized our data to resolve these issues, and then how the challenges of getting data into the system now that it's organized. So normally when you have a dictionary, you have something like, you have a term like light. What is light? When I say light, what do I mean? I'm hoping that you will respond to me that they were, you know, pretend this is a classroom and not a British classroom of the old school where everybody sits and says, yes, teacher. So what is light? What? Form of energy, light. Opposite of heavy. Opposite of dark. I mean, we've got a few things that are light, right? Not dark, not serious, not filled with calories, not fattening, not heavy. A whole bunch of, you know, and here I'm using the example of French. Each one of those, we can say there's one or more French terms that have a corresponding meaning. The Princeton WordNet has 47 different senses of light, and a computational method of bringing it in gets them all kind of tangled and confused. I won't explain that. What happens if we look at existing print dictionaries or other things that are called dictionaries even online? This is a Tagalog dictionary from the Philippines. And all of these things that we have on the screen are all adjectives. So here, let's look at light as an adjective. It could be magan, maliwang, malikay, mabilis. Which of those is light, not heavy? Can anyone tell me which of those is light, not heavy? Oh, come on. You must be able to look at this and say which is light, not heavy. Yes? What? The left. This one. No, but of our Tagalog words, we can't look at this and know by looking at this thing that this is light, whether this is this one or is it this one. It's probably not this one because it's a less common sense. It's almost certainly not this one because this is a dictionary from about 100 years ago, and they probably wouldn't have had that, been trying to get that sort of sense at that point. But really, all we know is that these four concepts map to English L-I-G-H-T. That's what we know. Here, this is a Swahili dictionary, a big chunk of text about light. And if you're a computer, you're not going to be able to figure out which one of these goes to any of these, right? There are probably people in this room who could tell you which of these Gujarati terms map to which of the senses of L-I-G-H-T. But if you're doing it, that's because you're using your human intelligence. You're sitting there, there's an actual person who's sitting there saying, okay, I know what this is in Gujarati, and I know what this is in English, and I know how to put them together. This is what we want to do. So if you don't have, in a traditional multilingual dictionary now, if you're just sort of taking in your data from French and from Swahili and from Gujarati and from Finnish and from Thai, you end up with these sort of connections. They're all of these terms mapping to this thing that's called L-I-G-H-T. And if you go online, there are many, many different places where you'll see that sort of a mapping. This is really what we want, right? We want to separate out this set of this concept and the way it's treated in other languages from this concept and the way it's treated in other languages, and this concept and that concept. Completely separate things. But this is what we get when we try to put them together. A big plate of linguistic linguini. It's all tangled, you can't pull it apart, and you can't use it for either producing a dictionary between, say, Gujarati and Tagalog, or doing a data resource like a Google Translate type thing, which is one of the reasons why Google Translate is so problematic. Okay, so what we've done is taken it apart. We've said, okay, instead of seeing it as a word, seeing something like light, L-I-G-H-T, as one word, let's look at it as 47 different concepts, 47 different ideas. Then we can take each of those ideas and find out what's the equivalent in this case, French. What's the equivalent for light, not dark, in French and in Swahili and in Finnish and in Thai? Not to be confused with the equivalents for this other idea, light, not heavy, or light, not serious, or light, not fattening. You keep the things separated out at the idea level, at the concept level, and you do not get confused, and then you can see how you can then, the sorts of applications that you're then able to do. And what you want to then end up do is if you have the French term légère, which is one of the translations for some of the concepts of light in English, you treat légère as the French side as a completely separate thing, so you're building a monolingual set of ideas, of concepts in French. So this légère as sandy, well, we map that to English sandy, and we map that to whatever the Sinhala term is for sandy, and leave the whole English light totally off to the side. And you can do it if each one of those circles is a a language, you can add in a lot more languages for pretty much every term. And you still find yourself not getting yourself tangled up. Now, it's more complicated than that. We want to show the links, and the links, so here we end up, this is that earlier slide where I said this is what we want. We have our English going to the concept, but we also have the other things going to the concept and the way that they link together. And there are complications in the way they link together. I'm not going to talk about that today. So you end up with this nice, these all things that all happen to have this English correspondence of LIGHT. Well, in many ways, that's irrelevant. That's only your access point for searching into the search box. And this is what you end up seeing when you put this online. So if you've got your Urdu term here, it's an Urdu term, it's got an Urdu definition, and then you can see that it actually matches to this idea of English rain, but it's not English rain. And the English rain actually has been linked to these other languages, so we show you the links to the other languages and also tell you that it's second generation, that be cautious, because it's the computer that's figuring this out for you, not an actual human who's gone and said that this term in this language matches to Urdu. Here's a different visualization in Chinese. We've got our Chinese word here, which means right, not left, not right, not wrong, not right, the right of the people to free speech. And this, in this case, is mapped to English, and then the English is mapped to these other languages. And here I intentionally made it so that we severed the link between Romanian and English. So Romanian is coming in through this African language called Songhai. Yeah, it's coming in through Songhai. And Songhai is linked to English. So you can see that there's even more of a longer pathway to Romanian. You could have this pathway stretching out, all the way to the window. But in practice, it tends, they don't tend to get a bit more than 4 generations separated. Now, just very briefly, this thing that I have as a little circle, this word LIGHT, there's a lot more going on than just it being LIGHT. There's a lot of other data. Think of it as a star thing. You've got meanings, you've got shape, things like light, lit, lighted, lighting, that are all part of the same word. You've got place where something is said. Different languages, have different expressions in the same language in different locations. The sounds that words make, the era in which it's spoken, like words have history, the relationships between words, and then if you can see the little yellow stars, each of those has little sub-issues that are going on. All of those are data elements that can be associated with particular words, each term in its own language, and that's a whole different talk that I won't give right now. What I do want to talk about is, we know that each language is there, has all its own terms, its own concepts, and ways of, its ways of expressions. In order to make use of that for either as a knowledge resource, as a standard dictionary, or for using it to produce textbooks, or for using it to produce medical information on your pill bottles, or any of the other uses of multilingual data, you need the data. And data isn't just floating out there. People often say to me, well, what about corpus mining? Why don't we just go and mine the corpus and just glean it all? Well, what is a corpus? A corpus is stuff that's been written down by people over time, and then collected and somehow analyzed and put in a way that can be used in particular machine applications. Well, if the data hasn't been written down and collected, then there's no corpus, and for most languages, there's no corpus. And even if there is a corpus, there are a lot of data questions about how you figure out what's in the corpus, but we'll put that question to the side for the moment. So, just looking at this little pyramid here, you see that there are about 20 languages, the 20 largest languages that people have, that about somewhat under half the world's population have some access to, some familiarity perhaps with English or with written Chinese, with Hindi, with Urdu, with Tamil. These are sort of the 100 million plus languages. 80 languages have more than 10 million speakers, but even within these 80, now we're starting to get to fairly low production, written, digitized, available material. When we get down to, when we start talking about the 300 some odd languages with more than 1 million speakers, we're starting to talk about, greatly reduced amounts of digitized material. We're talking, or available material. We're talking about languages with 25 million speakers, like Yoruba. Actually, that would be, sorry, one of the 80. But we're talking about some very large languages, and languages you've heard of, but many of them are not there. Then there are 1,500, roughly 1,500 languages with more than 100,000 speakers. Those are still pretty big and pretty robust languages. And then there are the small endangered languages on the long tail. And these are those languages, when we're talking about how do we get data if we're trying to do community participation activities, these are languages where their population groups are probably too small to expect that anybody's going to drift online and come and try to help us. So in order to reach these languages, we need to go out and actually find people, send field researchers out to do that. That's a different chore, a different set of challenges. Okay, of those languages, this is a graph from the European Union of their judgment of their machine translation technology that they've spent huge amounts of money on. This is official European Union projects, and the top graph is all of the official European languages that are in their system, 24 languages, so it's a 24 by 24 grid. I've distilled it down to this graph here, basically because these are the languages that have where the European Union is fairly confident that if you use their machine translation system, you'll get results that kind of are indicative of what the document is about. Basically, and there's one problematic language in there. So basically this boils down to a 7 by 7 language grid. And we're talking there are 7,000 languages out there, and quality translation pairs or marginally quality pairs with marginally good translation resources, you can fit in this little box here. Oh, what about the other languages? We don't have the data, and we can attribute the data, the not having the data now, so is it to either a lack of will, when nobody's gone out and done it, nobody thinks they could, what's the incentive to do it, or a lack of method, that there's not a systematic way of getting and collecting the data and putting it to service. There are also issues about sharing. Copyright is a huge issue, intellectual property, and people guard their IP, and somebody who's gone out and spent 20 years collecting language data doesn't want to give it up. That's a problem. And then, of course, the fact that it costs money. It doesn't cost that much money. It's something you can do once, and then it's done if the data is made available, freely available for everybody to share. But it does. There are initial investments, and there are not a huge amount of donors banging down the door saying, "Let's find the data for all of these different languages." So, question: if I were to go to the public and say to people and say, why wouldn't you participate? What are your obstacles? If I have an online system for you to come and give me your data about your language, and this is again where I want you to not be school children, but I want you to be participants. Why wouldn't you come and join on the online project? Other thoughts about why you might not participate in sharing in a project that says, okay, what's the word in your language for this concept of light, not heavy? Okay, I had not thought about fears. Okay. Other thoughts? People might not know about it, right? Anything else?
It might be hard to find a bridge language between languages that are not spoken very widely and someone who understands them.
Okay. Not that might be hard to find a bridge language. I have a few thoughts. A big one is that it costs a lot of money for some people. A lot of us are used to living in an environment where data is free, it flows freely, we can download things, but for a lot of people, bandwidth costs money, storage costs money, processing power, costs money. Accessing the network really is an expense. A lot of people, of course, work really hard and they don't have time to do things that aren't going to bring them in any money. A lot of people might not really care, right? How many of you have ever contributed to Wikipedia? 2, and here we're at a very highly educated, dynamic group of people who care about learning resources. But you could all go and contribute to Wikipedia in English or in your other languages. So, the inclination, is it there? For some people, yes. For a lot of people, no. And then, do you know how to use your device, how to send files and all those sort of clicky around sort of things? Are you literate? Are you literate in your language, or do you feel confident in literacy in your language? For example, in Tanzania, a lot of people are literate in Swahili, but in the other 120 languages, they've never have encountered written materials, so they wouldn't write in their mother tongue, even if they are very good at writing in Swahili. Do you really know how to share this information? Do you know how to say to spell things? Do you know how to pass on the things that are in your head? Do you know how to type things into a keyboard? And is it even possible? In Sinhala, that was a very difficult challenge for getting that slide. That's why it took so long. And as was mentioned, do you even know that this opportunity exists? Okay, so one of the challenges we're facing is that therefore only a fraction of people who do speak a language are going to be able to participate. And that fraction is going to be reduced in smaller languages which have fewer potential participants. A lot of places, people are hard to reach because there are few speakers or because they're low-income languages, so people don't have the sort of access, don't have the sort of interaction with technology. And then there is the fact that a lot of smaller, especially very small languages, are spoken in places that are very far from communication centers. So I'll be talking a bit about crowdsourcing, but when we've got languages that are too small for those things, we are working on other tools to be able to send graduate students out with a research project in a box, basically say, okay, here we can take this core data set that we have with 100,000 English defined concepts, and it's all set up so that we just configure the language for you, and you go out, you elicit as many terms according to a priority list as possible. During the course of however many months you have available to you for your research project, you come back, you upload it, you're done. You haven't had to set up a server, you haven't had to set up a database, you don't have to continue to host the things, you don't have to find a publisher. You've got the research project and it's immediately available and immediately useful. So that's something that we're hoping to gear towards for a lot of those, as many of those 5,500 languages as we can. And not necessarily so that you end up with whiz-bang machine translation for a language which is spoken by the one surviving grandmother in Bhutan, but so that you end up actually at least being able to preserve what it is, the heritage that is in her head and that will no longer be in her head when she passes on. Okay. I have some premises about why people will participate. As we've been talking about here, people like thinking about their languages. This morning session, we heard a great example of that family that was all talking about their languages, talking in different languages. And that happens all the time around dinner tables or at, people are, what's the word? Oh, no, that doesn't mean that. And people are having debates. And that doesn't just happen in English. That happens, and it doesn't just happen in educated families. It happens, in my experience, in the most remote village households in Tanzania. People like word games. I don't know, does anybody here play Scrabble? It's a pretty high proportion of people here who play Scrabble. Now, a lot of these things are not available in other languages. There's not considered a market for it. Like Nestle's doesn't consider that there's a market which is going to be purchasing milk in Sinhala. They're not thinking that there's a market that's going to be purchasing Scrabble in Sinhala. So if we provide that, perhaps this will actually find a new niche. People like to give things back to their own societies. And this is particularly true from diasporic populations, migrant populations that have gone somewhere, that want to continue their connection back home. And this is a way that we are certainly finding with African people who've migrated to Europe who want to be able to continue to be connected. And then in the design of the systems, in the games, there's something called gamification, and there are theories about why people participate in games, and it includes recognizing people for their work, and that there's competition gets your blood flowing and triggers you. If there are timers where you have a certain amount of time to give information, it's exciting and fun sometimes. We've designed these games, embedded them in Facebook, in large part because that's where people are. And we think that if people see their friends are playing the game and are getting recognition, the little flags that come up in Facebook, they'll be attracted. And people's friends tend to speak the same language as they do. This is number 8, why people don't like complex instructions, so it's poorly worded. We've reduced the complexity in the games so that it becomes very simple for people to give very direct responses to the cues that they're given. So we're not sitting there and saying, tell us everything about this word. We're saying, give us this one piece of information. And then we build cumulatively, so over time we eventually get the information that we want. So people are comfortable with Facebook. They're comfortable with their with their phones. So we've also designing things for the mobile phone. And then another reason we're using Facebook is Facebook has a lot of community groups, speaker groups of 10,000 people, and they're all sitting there. Well, what do we do? What do we talk about the Langi language of Tanzania? Well, here, let's give you something to do. Let's pump it and really do this as a group to see what we can do and get ourselves resources that are equal to these other people. See if we can get something that's as good as they have for Danish or other European languages. So our games are using this thing called crowdsourcing, and crowdsourcing is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. This is not paying people, it's engaging people. Trying to collect facts, and then we have ways of verifying them by making sure that we get the same piece of information from several different people is the way you score. You get points by being part of the consensus. And a lot of the initial things are asking simple questions, simple word questions. There are more complex questions for later on. One of the things that so with the mobile architecture, mobile games are, the things that people can do on their phones are a bit different than the things that they can do on Facebook, because they're different contexts. The phone, somebody is sitting around waiting for a bus or waiting for somebody, or they want to look busy, everybody else is checking their phone, so you want to check your phone too, right? Well, what do? You turn it on. How do you, one of the things you can do is, in order to unlock your phone for security reasons, we can ask you a question. If for example, we're having that data from the Tagalog dictionary. Okay, this Tagalog word is this the same, we have this English sense, we have this idea, something that is not dark. Does this Tagalog term mean that? You know, they look at it, and we're not telling them, is it the same as light? We're saying, is it the same as not dark? Not, you know, is it the same as the definition that's there? And you swipe this way to say yes. You swipe this way to say no. You swipe up to say, later, I just want to get to my phone right now and send an SMS. You swipe down to say, I don't know. I passed, and this is outside of my knowledge set. You've looked at your phone, you've done something incredibly simple, and you've helped build a resource for your language. There are technical challenges to this because people are using, you know, phones are going in and out of the network, the data is changing on our site at any given moment, so we have to continue to work on improving synchronization. But there are people working on that. This is a picture of the how the game looks embedded in Facebook. So you're in the Facebook system, and you're comfortable there, you're happy. And important thing is that in a lot of countries, Facebook is working, has this thing called internet.org, which is trying to provide free access to people to use Facebook. So we're attempting to kind of sneak in under that by putting it in Facebook and taking advantage of their generosity. This is just a picture of a translation game. You can't really see it, but we're asking, this is in, the interface is mostly in Russian here, saying, we've got this working definition in English of whatever the word is, and in the orange it says, in Russian, what is the term for this in your language? And you type it in, and then you click on click, move on to the next thing, and it gets logged in here that you have a pending point. If you are part of the consensus, you will get a point for you'll get a score for that, and you can check on your scoreboard on how many pending points you have, where you've won. This is a definition game. This is actually in English, but there are parallels. Once we get the terms validated in other languages, we can do the same thing in those other languages. Okay, here is our working definition of a particular word. Is it a good definition? A lot of the working definitions that we have come in from a source that has some pretty questionable definitions. So you can say, yes, I can write the winning definition. And if you click there, and you can say, or no, I can't. Or you can vote for something that somebody else has already submitted. If you don't like the definitions, the options that you see there, you can write your own. Oops. Now it takes time to write your own. That's actually a fairly intensive effort. So instead of, if you see that somebody has already done that and it's a good definition, you just want to vote for theirs, because you'll get a point for voting for theirs. But if you write the winning definition, you get 10 points, and you get credit for having written the winning definition. So there's an incentive to write the best one, but not too much of an incentive for everybody to sit there and spend time copying what somebody else has done and changing one word. So here you just see it in the input box. Then there's the example game where we have a term that's already been defined. We put in the definition up at the top, and we can do this in other languages other than English. This is just, and here we've gone to Twitter and found a whole bunch of tweets and said, okay, click on the ones that match this sense. So this way we get example sentences to use for illustrating in the dictionary. And here with Twitter, we've got it set up to interact, we've got it set up to work with Wikipedia. We can set it to work with any sort of corpus. With Swahili, we're working on an academic corpus. Second to last slide. Actually, last slide. So, where are we going with all this? This is all stuff that at Kamusi we have developed, and this is our platform. If you go to the kamusi.org site, you'll probably find that it's offline because we actually greatly increased the amount of data that we had, and we ended up exploding our server. And our technical team in South Africa has been trying to get the server going, and everything they do seems to make it not, it hasn't really worked to solve some of the underlying problems of going to big data on a small server. It will be fixed, but if you go there and you see there's an unexpected error, I expected it. But once we get that resolved, we're working on putting together a consortium of groups that are working on different aspects of languages and technology. So people who are working on tools to get linguistic data, corpus mining or various other ways of going to the Twitter stream or various ways of acquiring the terms, the things that people are, the expressions people use. And then we're working with groups that are focused on particular languages. And it's, obviously it's much better if you have an expert who's working on a language than if you're just sitting there trying to go to the crowd and explain, train each person who in the crowd, or attract them, and there's a lot of effort that's going to be involved in that sort of a task. But if you can have experts who are involved and who are receiving recompense for their work, you can, on particular languages, whenever there's funding available for them, they can move through the expert system and really produce rich, deep, detailed data. And then there are people who are working on applications, groups that are working on applications to use the data, whether it's in computer-assisted translation or any of the other any of the other tools that require knowing what the terms are in a language in order to be able to make use of those for the technologies that will be of benefit to people or benefit to corporations. We don't care if people make money off it, but of benefit to connecting people with ideas and information and each other. So if you're involved in any project that is in any way there, you're welcome to join. The idea is to build a global linguistic data infrastructure that really maps the way people have expressed themselves and is able to be used for advanced technology applications. And with that, I thank you for attending, and I'm certain to welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Martin. That was a fascinating insight into the processes and the problems, I think, with creating a multilingual dictionary. I'm sure there are a few questions, so perhaps I can see if anyone would like to. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but
Good.
I think I've narrowed it to 2 for the moment. First, you gave the example of Go as a usually brief attempt as you were going through your presentation. That's a kind of obscure definition of Go. If I was going through the interface, I might not remember that Go means this, like to have a go.
Right.
Do you prime people with the idea of alternate definitions? I mean, it seems like you're collecting a lot of different word senses, but you're only focusing on one at a time. How do you convey this to people with interfaces? Okay,
it has to be conveyed a bit in. It's hard because we need very simple instructions for a fairly complex set of things. Now, what we have there is where these 100,000 English concepts come is from something called the WordNet. And so we don't have a pre-existing set, of pre-existing filters to say these are the ones we want and these are the ones we don't want. Those filters I want to develop by when people skip a thing, we say, okay, this has been being skipped a lot, so let's deprioritize that. But when we have 47 different senses of light, at the beginning we don't know which are the important senses of light and which are not the important senses of light. And yes, Go, I'll make a go of it, is not the most important sense of go, the English verb, but we either need to know that it's not the most important sense, or we need to refine the definition so that it's useful. Because, but yeah, there's certainly some in that particular data set. there are some things that we just really don't even want. You know, that we don't even care. You know, for example, the word "as" has a lot of important meanings in English, but one of the things in the data set is American Samoa. It's an abbreviation for American Samoa. Now, somebody in South Africa does not need to know that AS is an abbreviation for American Samoa, and nor are they going to have a term for American Samoa. But you know, that's our starting point, and so we'll try to use try to let the less significant terms drop out and work on building the priority list of concepts.
Cool. Second question.
Second question.
You had that star diagram of a lot of different features of words. I'm curious, is that something that you're actively developing, or?
Yeah, so if you look at the data structure has a lot, you know, it's not just the word. There are all of these other things. I can give you the reference to just a little piece that explains the data model. That's or
sure. So word sense disambiguation makes a lot of, like, it's very clear how that would be used. How do you imagine using things like the time period in which something was used, the sound of a word, like?
Time period. So for historical linguistics, that would be something that would be of interest. Is in many ways that's more of an academic issue, which is not to disparage academics. So if you have something, if you say that this Hindi term is derived from the Sanskrit term such and such, right now that's all that we know about it, right? But we can actually treat the Sanskrit as its own language, and each of the concepts in Sanskrit can be differentiated. If there's a polysemic term in Sanskrit, it can be split apart so that the different meanings are there, and then you map the Hindi term to its actual Sanskrit, the sense in Sanskrit from where it came from. Well, now that sense in Sanskrit can be linked to its other spawn in other languages, right? Throughout the subcontinent and even off to Europe. So you can use that to see those sorts of bridges, and you can do that through Old English or Old High German. That's when I say mapping through time and space, that's the time feature. But that's more of a intellectual scientific study sort of application rather than a computer application. The other one you were asking about was sound. When I speak into my telephone recognizes when I say, "Okay, Google, tell me what time it is in Delhi." It does that very well. Well, the engineers at Google know what I sound like because I'm American and they're American and we talk pretty much the same. I have a feeling probably for a lot of Indians who speak into their telephone and say, "Okay, Google, tell me what the time is in Delhi," or what the weather is in Delhi, you're going to get very bad results because Google doesn't understand your accent. Well, if we record people and geotag where they're, this is English as spoken in Delhi, this is, English as spoken in Australia, and you get those sorts of accents, then we can do things like speech recognition that okay, this person is from Texas, therefore I'm going to understand what they're saying based on the Texas algorithm. Or you could also spit back out to them so that somebody from Australia is getting their phone. Actually, my GPS has an American English or a British English setting to tell me my directions. You can do that as well in various other applications.
Right, thank you for a very interesting talk. Just 2 questions again, because I'm curious. So you're working a lot with lexical terms, right? So I was wondering how easy it is for you when you have analytic and synthetic languages colliding with each other, because if you have analytic languages and one word maps onto the other, then it will be easy. But when you have synthetic languages where you have grammatical particles attaching themselves to words, right, to create the plural, but also to create verb forms, etc., then how does your software cope with that? And secondly, have you considered partnering with classrooms and language labs in underprivileged communities, because what we have right now in many classrooms is the Rosetta Stone, which is extremely expensive for many parts of the world. So I guess I'm wondering about what's the long-term involvement that you plan for your web page in other parts of the world. Thank you.
I appreciate the first question. I'm going to avoid answering it because it's very technical. This is an issue that we are working on dealing with, and actually had a very fruitful discussion earlier this week when I was meeting at the University of Hyderabad with people where we figured out some approaches to tackle just this issue. Indian languages I'm not as familiar with, but a language like Kinyarwanda spoken in Africa, the way that it works, any given verb can have 900 million different forms. So you can't put those all in a dictionary, right? But the computer can do pretty good analysis of what picks out each of the different elements and says, okay, this is your verb stem, and so then you can, if you know what the verb stem is, you need the data to begin with, then you can start processing, and you can reduce down to, if you're trying, you can reduce those 900 million forms to a few forms that map to things in, forms, see, saw, seeing, sees, and figure out how to deal with the subjects. But some of those are things that you just can't do automatically. A lot of those are things. Some of those are things you can't do from putting into a data set. You need to derive algorithms. You need to go, if you're doing translation, you need to have models for each specific language. You need to have models between languages. Those are things for computer science students and other, lots of projects that can exist, but you need the data first. So yeah, there's a lot of future work, but some of that stuff that we're taking care of. Your second question about, have I considered that particular set of groups? I've never heard of them, but I would be very happy to consider, if you were able to make the introduction. Yes.
Multilingualism into the community.
Yes, and so we're working with universities in Africa on working with their students on actually bringing in data. I've been talking with secondary school teachers about how to actually make this, to make being part of the project part of the curriculum. So secondary students have certain knowledge, and they're also trying to learn English, and so we can use their efforts to learn English to actually pick their brains about their own languages at the same time. That's an issue of funding and time and partners, and I'd be very happy if you know any of the three.
I think we've got time for one last question before we go for lunch.
So I appreciate the kind of work you're doing, but there is something that I would like to draw your attention to, which is another level of complexity that is inevitable when we talk about multilingualism. I'd give an example. I am a Hindi speaker, and Google does give me the option to translate its page into Hindi, but I never do that. Because when Google, if Google was to translate, if I choose that option, I would not be able to understand what is written on the page, because the kind of Hindi that I use is very different from the kind of Hindi that is given on that page. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, we are here talking about plurilingualism, about bilinguals being not just two monolinguals, but 1 + 1 is not 2 for them, but probably 3. So how, I understand that you're still at the beginning phases of your project, but then how in future do you plan to sort of address such challenges?
Okay. The Google Translate challenge is a problem of, I think, the methods that Google uses to translate are based on largely on, it's something called statistical machine translation, and it's based on guesses that are in reference to data that they are trying to put together between languages, and they don't have, especially, between English and Hindi, they don't have a huge and varied set of parallel data that they can use in order to make their inferences. So you end up with a lot of problems in the translations. Now, if they were giving perfect translations, and those, but if I understand your question, if they're giving perfect translations, but it's very bookish, and it's not the way that you would say it, that was a different issue. That's, okay, you can't, in order to get the register right, this is a formal letter, this is an informal letter, that's again something that people you would have to say, okay, we have the basic data, and now we're going to try to expand that and do other sorts of applications with it. What we are able to do is to provide information, and the more data we start with, the better the quality of the information that we're able to provide, whether it's to somebody. So if you want to have a document and you have a sentence in your document, and it's, we can look at the different words and say, okay, light appears, give you the choice of selecting, do you mean light, not heavy, light, not dark? You select light, not heavy, and now it just sends to the machine translation, or gives you the option for your own manual translation of saying, okay, light, not dark is this term, or this, you have this option of terms in Hindi, and you've completely not had to deal with any of those other concepts of light in English. You've pre-selected it. So we can go from making those sorts of guesses in statistical machine translation, which end up, where you're starting with a 30% chance of being accurate, we can go up to probably about a 95% chance of being accurate for most terms. But the fine nuances of translation, people are still going to have to do that. That's, we can't just wave a magic wand and say, okay, this is exactly the right, the good word, the best way of expressing yourself in this particular context. People still need to be involved.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, for your very interesting questions, and thank you also to Martin for such an interesting talk. We have a small picture for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fun. Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks. Okay.